Shalom, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar. Tonight is one of the most auspicious nights in the Chabad calendar. Tonight, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, on Tes Adar, the 9th of Adar, came to America, and he brought a new level of spirituality that hadn't existed in America before that. It's a very, very auspicious day. Also, tomorrow evening at 6 p.m., Jews around the world are doing a special prayer for the coming of Mashiach, which brings an awareness and please God and merit of us just even thinking to do this prayer, which is all about just stop what you're doing and say the prayer. This just that we're committed to doing it should bring about the revelation of Mashiach this very evening. Also, it's just over 1 month to the Rebbe's Yom Haledet, to the Rebbe's birthday. And we will be saying a Psalm 120. It's just over a month, and Rabbi Carlebach has been taking us on a journey of learning all about the Rebbe's and Hasidic stories and miracles, etc., etc. He's going to be sharing tonight Purims at the Rebbe. I was there for a few of them. They were absolutely unbelievable. But we look forward to hearing what Rabbi Carlebach has to say. So Rabbi Carlebach, thank you for doing this, and over to you.
Thank you. A good vach, Rabbi Masinta. And as Rabbi Masinta said, tomorrow is a very special, auspicious day, the anniversary of the previous Rebbe coming to Kader HaTachtoin, as they called it, the last stronghold of Golos, and turning it over completely. And so please, everybody, join tomorrow that special prayer for bringing Mashiach now. As everybody knows, when Adar comes in, we increase our joy. And we have quite an unusual Purim this year in the fact that Purim is Thursday night, Friday. It doesn't happen often, just as Pesach being Saturday night with getting rid of your chametz on Shabbos morning doesn't happen often. So it's an unusual Purim, and everybody should celebrate it. And I'd like to go through a few of the famous years with the Rebbe on Purim. Purim by the Rebbe was a sight which anybody who was there could never, ever forget. The Rebbe, as everybody who saw him, radiated with joy. One can see total joy, as the Rebbe said. We have to go out of all hagbolas, all boundaries, and especially now with COVID, when people may have certain anxieties and things that are bothering them, we have to be able to fulfill the law on Purim of Chaim Adam Lipsuma. A person has to climb out of himself and truly reach the ultimate joy. And I would encourage people to go onto YouTube and other places, because you can find, as I have, many, many beautiful occasions of the Rebbe and the joy that he infected everybody with. It was truly contagious to be together with the Rebbe at that time. An interesting point brought out on the Gem video of Purims with the Rebbe is a little incident mentioned by Rabbi Hillel David Krinsky. Rabbi Hillel David Krinsky, Rabbi Yudel, the Rebbe's secretary's son, he was the one who organized for the Rebbe to be on cable television. And that was the days way before internet or anything. You had certain set channels, but you also had cable television. And the Rebbe was, Farbrengens were live there. You would have this camera crew come to 770. And he tells that it took months of preparation. They had to buy the time, and obviously they had to get the Rebbe's agreement. So in 1986, Tovshin Mem Vov, about 2 months before the Purim, they had broadcast the Yud Shvat. They asked the Rebbe's permission to broadcast the Purim Fabregan. And the Rebbe quoted the Megillah, which says, Mishpacha, Mishpacha, that it should be celebrated, family and family. And he said, this is a family event. And he didn't want it broadcast on cable TV. So you see that there was a specific personal feeling that the Rebbe had with his Hasidim on Purim, that they are family and he wants to Fabreng exclusively with them. In 1950, Tovshin Yud, that was Yud Shvat was the Histalkus, so Yud Adar was just after the Shloshim of the previous Rebbe, and on Purim that year, basically the Rebbe did not Fabreng publicly. Rabbi Jacobson, in fact, Fabrenged. But the first public Fabrengen that we have with the Rebbe is Tovshin Yud Aleph, 1951. That was still upstairs in 770. The crowd was very small, and the Rebbe took a lot of l'chaim, that Purim, it says. And then he spoke quite startling and harsh words. And one of the things that he said to Rabbi Simpson was that it says in the Talmud that when they built the second Beis HaMikdash, there were people who still remembered the first Beis HaMikdash, and they were crying at the difference. So he said to these Hasidim, you saw the Rebbe Rashab, you saw then the previous Rebbe, and even the difference between the two, but the previous Rebbe was a son of the Rebbe Rashab. Who am I? And the Rabbi Simpson went over to the Rebbe and he said, Hasidim don't want to hear that. And the Rebbe said, don't worry, I'm not in any way absolving myself of the responsibility. And then Rabbi Mentlik went over to the Rebbe and he said, all the Lubavitcher Rebbes are one hemshech. They are one connecting from the Alter Rebbe till now. They are one thing. And he put out his cup and he said, I want to have a l'chaim from the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe smiled and gave him mashke. Also, at that time, he called the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe Shlita. And at the end of the Fabrengen, the Rebbe started to give mashke to everybody from his own koss. And immediately the whole crowd came to the Rebbe to ask for themselves. And he gave mashke to everybody there. And during the giving it out, he stood on his chair. And it says that he spoke to certain people, personal inyanim. And when all the mashke in 770 was finished, there were still people who hadn't received any. And he told them to bring water. And he started to give water from his cup and told them to say l'chaim. And at the end, he concluded the Fabrengen Purim 1951 by saying, und der Rebbe Shlita soll uns führen an gegen Mashiach, that the Rebbe Shlita should lead us towards Mashiach, which is one of the things we're praying for tomorrow. And we now go to 1953. In 1953, for the Jews in the Soviet Union, it was a very, very terrible time. It was a period filled with terror and dread. And Stalin, Yemach Shemoy, as Dr. Plot was at its peak. The decree was, Stalin said, that the Jewish doctors are trying to kill him. There was going to be all kinds of false court cases, and Russia's Jewish physicians were disappearing rapidly. People were being purged left and right, never to be heard from again. And Purim, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York, there were a large crowd of Jews who came to Fabregan with the Rebbe. Many of the participants had themselves just come out from behind the Iron Curtain, and a good number of them were wasting away. They suffered from the wrath of Stalin's tyranny, and they were in jail in Russians' presence, and they couldn't forget their oppressed brethren across the sea. And the Rebbe often spoke about Russian Jewry, and we all know that he worked tremendously hard in alleviating and helping the Jews of Russia, of communist Russia. And that year, the Purim Fabregan commenced with a mimer, and he brought up Hadassah, who is Esther. And whenever the Rebbe said a mimer, his holy face underwent a visible transformation before beginning the discourse. And people could also see that he tied a handkerchief around his fingers. And a few minutes later, the Rebbe delivered the mimer. And the Fabregan continued for many, many hours. There was much l'chaim. Late at night, almost dawn, an unusual thing occurred. For the second time that evening, the Rebbe's holy face began to radiate with that special solemnity and earnestness that meant he was going to deliver another mimer. It had never happened before. The Rebbe had never given two mamorim at the same Fabregan. There was absolute quiet. No one dared utter a sound. And the Rebbe began to speak. And he said, after the Tsar fell in Russia, it was announced that the government would be holding elections. The Rebbe Rashab, who was the fifth Rebbe, sent word to the Hasidim that they were to participate in the voting process. There was one particular Chassid who was completely removed from the affairs of the world. To him, the political arena was foreign territory. Nevertheless, having received an explicit instruction from the Rebbe, he set out to fulfill the Rebbe's command. And when you fulfill the Rebbe's command, you don't just do it. With a sense of awe and reverence, in preparation, he first went to the mikveh. He then put on his gartel, and he set out for the polling booth. When he got there, he had no idea of what to do. And the worldly Hasidim helped him cast his voice. And the way it was that you shouted out for the one you wanted to elect, and the person who got the most shouts, he was the one who won the election. And the word you used when you shout is hurrah, hurrah. That was the word in Russian. But in Yiddish or in Hebrew, when you say hurrah, that is two Hebrew words. Hurrah means he is evil. And this chassid was fulfilling the Rebbe's command. And so the chassid did what everyone else was doing. And when the votes were cast Everyone cried out, "Hoorah!" And he also began yelling, "Hoorah, hoorah, hoorah." As he uttered these words, the Rebbe's face burned with a holy fire. The Hasidim were astounded. They realized that more was going on that met the eye, but they didn't understand what had just happened. Swept up by the powerful emotion, the entire 770 all got up and shouted, "Hoorah, hoorah, hoorah." And then, with that introduction, the Rebbe delivered the second mimer based on the verse. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the name Pur Lot. In 1953, March 4th, you could look it up, coincided with the 17th day of Adar. On that day, the Russian state radio in Moscow made the startling announcement that 2 days previously, on Purim, Joseph Stalin, Yamach Shemoy V'Zichroi, had fallen gravely ill and had lost consciousness. The next morning, on Adar 18th, the whole truth was finally revealed. Stalin, Baruch Hashem, was dead. Kein Yovdu Kol Harashoim. And do you know what? He actually died the exact moment that the Rebbe and the Hasidim were shouting "Hoorah" back in Brooklyn at the Rebbe's Fabregan. And although the term rejoicing and gladness are not usually uttered in association with the city of Moscow, Jews throughout the Soviet Union breathed a collective sigh of relief, tempered, of course, by a realistic apprehension of the future. But no one could have imagined in his wildest dreams a more miraculous end to Stalin's reign of terror. At long last, the doctor's plot was over, and countless of prisoners were set free. In fact, in the wake of Stalin's death, the oppressive atmosphere in the Soviet Union was greatly lightened, and so ended one of the grimmest chapters in the annals of Jewish history. And the Rebbe often spoke that the month of Adar is the month of miracles, and those who were there in Tovshin Yud Gimel in 1953 were personal witnesses to it. In fact, I recall hearing this story from Rabbi Khan, what he taught us, and he was there personally. We go now to 1955. 1955 was the most unusual year. During the Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke about the fact that materiality, physicality, all kinds of material wealth is a very, very big test. It's a challenge for a person to have to worry about physical wealth and serving God Almighty. And he said, we see that the Nisayon of Shiras is a very difficult one. And then he laughed and he said, nevertheless, halavai of all Jews, they should all become wealthy and they should work with themselves to be able to overcome the nisayon, the temptation of wealth. And then he said, in America, there is a custom to vote. Every resolution has to be put to the vote. And the Rebbe raised his voice and he said the following: those people here that are ready to take upon themselves that Hashem should give them ashiras bahafloga, tremendous amount of wealth, and they don't mind the haravanya, the toil, that they will then have to fight with the Yetzer Hara, so they should lift up their hand with a complete heart. That's what the Rebbe said. On that tape of Gem, you see Rabbi Popak, Shmuel Isaac Popak, telling this story. He doesn't say whether he was one of the people who raised his hands or not, but he says at that time, going through the Chasidim's minds and hearts was an embarrassment to lift up their hands for physical things in front of everybody. And sadly enough, only 6 or 7 Hasidim lifted up their right hands that they were ready to become wealth. And the Rebbe says, you don't lift up your hands? Nu, was soll ich tun? What can I do? And the Rebbe answered, then you come to me with complaints. Why do we suffer physically so much? Why don't we have enough? And when there comes a time of our eis rotzen, a time of favor in heaven, that the blessings are waiting for you, pravit men chabatske shtusim, people become foolish, thinking that it is not Hasidish to ask for physical things. He says, when it comes to business, you're ready to invest in a doubt of the doubts. And when we come together in a time of goodwill, and the question of parnasa will not interfere with you, and all you have to do is lift up your hand, and yet you're embarrassed to do them. It's not lefi kvoidai. To pick up your hand, you want to be called a person who is more intellectual than that. And the Rebbe was very, very upset by that thing. But Rabbi Popak, Shmuel Isaac concludes and says, those 6 or 7 people who lifted up their hand all became multi-millionaires. I recalled recently reading somewhere that a lady wrote to the Rebbe, went into the Rebbe and said that she would be from those people who would have lifted up their hand immediately. Sadly enough, there weren't enough people at that time to take advantage of a unique opportunity. As I say, in 1955, the Rebbe gave his Hasidim all the opportunity. All you had to do was lift up your hand, and you would have been promised to become millionaires. We go next to Purim Tov Shin Chai, Purim 1958. The introduction that is given is that in those years, 770 was only the building of 770, and there was like an open courtyard where now there's the steps to go down to 770, what they call the shalshal, between 770 and the 2 apartment buildings, 778 there, that they eventually bought, and the shul is all downstairs. But in the 50s, that shul didn't exist. So many times during the year, at little Fabregens or on Shabbos, the Rebbe would Fabreng in the courtyard. It was very cold. People would sit with coats or stand with coats. But at the big Fabrengens, Yutas Kislev, Yud Shvat, Purim, they rented a hall in a few different places. And they say that in 1958, the hall was Albany and Rutland Avenue. That was one of the most amazing Fabrengens of Purim ever. Always remembered by everyone in the annals of Hasidim. I remember when I came to 770, they spoke about it in awe. Today, everything is printed. You could get everything and read all about it. I'd like to point out that Shushan Purim of 1940, when the previous Rebbe had come to America, so Shushan Purim, they founded Tomchet Mimim Lubavitch. So Purim 1958 was Chai Shana, was 18 years from the founding of Lubavitch Yeshiva in New York. And so the Rebbe spoke a lot about Tomchet Mimim, as we'll mention soon. We know that the Rebbe took quite a bit of mashka before he even came to the Farbrengen. And at the Farbrengen, he was taking more and more until there were certain older Hasidim that were worried about the Rebbe's health, and they didn't even want to give it to him. And he spoke about the fact that the Tsar Hamashkim is refusing to give it to him. And then he started, by the way, that Fabregan lasted from 8:30 to 5:30 the next morning. That is a 9-hour Fabregan. That was Purim Tovshin Chai with what they call Meire Dike Geluyim, unbelievable revelations. One of the things that the Rebbe said is that Reb Chonya Morozov used to say that Purim, you could say whatever you want, because that's when you're taking samashka, and the person who is speaking to someone else will never have a faribel, because the person speaking saying, you can't blame me. It was basically the mashka. Then the Rebbe says, at the moment, I'm not yet shikar because you prevent me from drinking more. I would already be at Adaloyada, but the people around me don't allow me to. And he said, this one's worried about that his tie should be in the right place. And he's thinking to himself, do his socks match his tie? Because in America, there has to be a connection between the foot and the throat. And that is what an animal, a behemoth, is all about. Because a behemoth walks on fours, so his neck and his foot is the same level, and therefore he must make sure that he has the same color on his foot as the tie on his neck. He says, you think I am just making jokes, but he was quite serious. And as I say, he spoke a lot about Tomchet Mimim. There was then a teacher in the Lubavitch Yeshiva, and the Rebbe had given him permission to send his son to another yeshiva. And the Rebbe told the son and him not to take the advice that he had given them, but rather to send their children to Lubavitch, his son to Lubavitch. And he said that I'm looking for someone to volunteer to become Adaloyada. That they should go all the way. And then the Rebbe spoke to a few people about learning, as I say, also in Lubavitch. He told another one whose name was Sydney. He said, Sydney, his Hebrew name was Shalom. And he said they should start calling you, instead of Sydney, they should call you Shalom. And your wife should call you Shalom. And then you're guaranteed to have Shalom bias. And I promise you a son. And actually, at that time, he had only had daughters, and he had asked for the bracha for a son, and he was given it. That year, as I say, was one of the most unusual and joyous Purims by the Rebbe, going down in the annals. And there you really saw mishpacha, how the Rebbe spoke to individuals. And many times he told them to take a big, full glass. And then we come to a very famous Fabregan of Purim Tovshin Chav Vav. It was a very unusual Fabregan, where the Rebbe was asking for more and more mashka. You see on that tape of Gem that a grandson of Rabbi Zevin, who was very close to the Rebbe, was at that Fabrengen. And the Rebbe called him over and said, you should have a big glass of mashka, but two, one for your grandfather and one for you. Says the Rebbe poured a big glass into from his kos into a big cup, but he couldn't drink, so he only drank a little bit of it. And the Rebbe made him drink the whole thing. He said, that's for your grandfather, and now this is for you. And he made him drink another one. And then he offered him some of the cake on the Rebbe's personal plate. And he said to him, for your grandfather, you don't need. You only need for yourself. And he had him drink 3 glasses of mashka. And this Rabbi Zevin, the grandson, says that normally, if he would even drink a little, he'd be totally out. But the entire time that the Rebbe was there at the Fabrengen, he was sharp. He remembered all the details. He was fully aware. The moment the Rebbe left, he collapsed completely. And he says, you see what the Gemara says, that wine makes you drunk and joyous, but fear stops you from it. And he said that to Hasidim that year, that they should all say L'chaim on a big, a full glass of wine. And he said that they should just empty out the bottles of mashka. He says that since now it's already Shushan Purim, he's speaking about Pesach, and then at the end of the Fabrengen, he gave mashka to some of those who were there. And then he said, Kol haposhet yad noisnim loy. Anybody who puts out their hand, they will be given. You can imagine the Stupenish. Everybody wanted to get mashke from the Rebbe himself, Kol haposhet yad, and he said l'chaim u'levracha to everyone who came. And the Rebbe said, when they began pushing so much, he said, you should come one after the other, not all of you in one time. And then he also told everyone basically that he's only giving them once. And to a person who are already gotten mashke, and he was standing near the Rebbe looked at him, "What are you standing for?" He said, "I am trying to prevent people from pushing." And the Rebbe said, "Whether you are preventing people from pushing, I don't know. One thing I do know, you are taking up place." And another person came with 2 cups, and he said, "I'm taking for my friend because he doesn't want to push." And the Rebbe said, if he doesn't want to push, he can't get anything. Another person who took a picture of the Rebbe, the Rebbe said to him, "Did you get the L'chaim yet?" And when he answered yes, he said that picture is chitzonius, and that was not the reason that your soul came down for. After the Rebbe had made the bracha achrona and gone to his room, he came out to go home, and he saw one of the Tamimim holding a bottle of mashke. So he took the mashke from him, and he began pouring some more. And so it was over an hour that they were standing outside by his car pouring mashke. Interestingly enough, that people started to climb on the car because they wanted to make sure they got the mashke from the Rebbe. And unfortunately, the climbing on the car, there were 4 flat tires, and I think even the roof of the car collapsed. They had to get some personal guy to take the Rebbe home. And the rabbi, I remember hearing from Rabbi Lipsker that he actually stood there on Purim Tavshin Chavav with his cup for Kolapeshet Yad, and the Rebbe said, "You got already?" He said, "There was a hole in my cup." And then the Rebbe got home, and he began, there were people at the house, and the Rebbe started to give again to the mashke to those who hadn't accepted. And he said to someone, "What do you have to push here for? There's only a small crowd left." And he also said, "There's no point in taking twice because nothing will be added to the fact of the bracha by taking a second time." And that was, as I say, in Tavshin Chavav, 1966. And now we come to a Purim that I remember. I was in New York at that time. And that was 1971. 1971, President Zalman Shazar, who came from Lubavitcher Hasidim. His name Shazar was Shneur Zalman Rubashov, and he gave himself the name Shazar. In fact, if you look at the history, do you know that in 1927, Shazar was born in 1890. He passed away in 1975 at the age of 85. In 1927, Shazar was in Germany, and he was one of the people very, very influential in getting the German rabbis and government to put pressure on the Russian government to free the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe because he knew he was very involved with Chabad Hasidim. As far as I can understand, he was a Jew who kept Shabbos and kosher, and he was very big in Ben Gurion's government, and he became the third president of Israel. By the way, the Rebbe had already written to the second president of Israel that he does not want to use the word Nasi. Nasi is the word president in Hebrew, because a Nasi refers to Mashiach. And he wrote to him that from when he was a child, he can picture, from 5 years old, he can picture Mashiach's coming, so he must forgive him for not addressing him as Nasi. The Rebbe, there is an envelope that the Rebbe sent to Shazar in which he writes President Zalman Shazar, but he refused to give the name Nasi. Now, Shazar came to the Rebbe quite a few times. In those days, there was a very big tumult from the Israeli government that as the president, it is not respectful for Shazar to go visit the Rebbe. He can meet with him, but it's respectful that he represents the entire country of Israel, that the Rebbe should come to him. This was a very big thing in the 60s, and the Rebbe said that my father-in-law told me not to leave 770. He has to come, basically, and the Shazar got literally sick, and he said he wants to go not as the president of Israel, but as a chassid to the Rebbe, and finally he got permission. This was in the 60s, and in 1971, when Shazar came to visit President Nixon on certain missions from Israel, including the old city of Jerusalem and the peace processes, etc., he gave speeches in Florida in Yiddish for the bonds, and then he came to New York, and he would be there for Purim. So he came the night of Purim to the Megillah. There are very beautiful pictures. The security then was immense. You had all Israeli Secret Service, you had policemen at the doors, only those recognized by Rabbi Carlebach. He stood there and said who could go in. There was only one door that was open. And Shazar came after, by the way, the Rebbe had sent certain representatives to visit Shazar in his hotel, and the Rebbe prepared for his visit. Amongst the preparations that the Rebbe prepared was he ordered one of his Hasidim, Shalom Sidney Hecht, to get a beautiful Megillah with a beautiful silver case in it. And then he also ordered 50 brand new Sidurim with the words Purim Tovshin Lamed Aleph. One was leather bound that he gave it. And he also got a special maima of the Alter Rebbe printed for the evening. 770 was very, very beautifully prepared. And when they asked the Rebbe how to prepare it, he said, instead of my stender, put 3 tables. One was for the Rebbe in the Megillah, the other was for Shazar with his Megillah that the Rebbe had given him, and the third table was for the Rashag, the Rebbe's brother-in-law. It's interesting that Shazar brought to the Rebbe some beautiful svarim of the Tzemach Tzedek, of the Alter Rebbe, many mamorim that he found because he was very into books that he had found over the years that Chabad didn't even have in their existence. And the Rebbe, it says there that the Rebbe asked that they bring food into his room from Mermelstein's catering, and it should be very, very beautiful. When they wanted to bring dishes from the Rebbe's house for it, he said no. They should do everything from the catering, and so it was a Wednesday afternoon. The Rebbe had sent a group of people to welcome Shazar in. When Shazar came to 770, and you see the pictures of the immense love and affection that they had for one another. I started to mention the Shazar's connection with Lubavitch. Do you know that in 1948, it was actually Shazar who suggested to the previous Rebbe to found Kfar Chabad? He's the one who got the property, and the previous Rebbe gave the Haskama for, it was an Arab village before, and he gave his Haskama. So Shazar had a lot to do with establishing Kfar Chabad and the tremendous things for Chabad, and the relationship between the Rebbe and Shazar was a genuine one, where you see in the pictures one of love and affection. In fact, when the Rebbe and Shazar walked in to the shul that night, they came down by elevator, you see the Rebbe's arm around Shazar. He's basically holding Shazar's arm with tremendous affection. And when the Rebbe went out in 770 to welcome him, they hugged and they kissed each other twice. And when the Rebbe came in, when Shazar came in, he gave him, amongst other things, he gave him the Siddur. And he said that my father-in-law had a tremendous memory, but nevertheless, when it came to davening, even Mincha Maidev, he only davened with a Siddur. So therefore, I prepared a Siddur for you as well. And then he added, the truth is, I should also daven from this Siddur, but it's already more than 20 years that I am davening from my father-in-law's Siddur, so that's why I'm not. And Shazar agreed that you shouldn't you shouldn't change. When they left the room, Shazar told to the Rebbe that after the Megillah, the Rebbe said to Shazar, let's go back to the room. And Shazar said, maybe you want to eat something first because it's Tainus Esther and you're fasting, and then I'll come in. But he said, no. And they went into the Rebbe to the Rebbe's room together. Rabbi Label Groner brought in some warm drink and mezainis and mashke and peiros, and Shazar stayed in the Rebbe's room till 12 o'clock at night. And then he went out and he gave Rabbi Chadikov a pan with some money, and those 4 hours of the Yechidus, the Rebbe didn't eat anything, and he remained fasting. Only after Shazar had left the Rebbe to go to Merkos, did he eat something, and then he walked Shazar to accompany him to the car, and at 12:30, basically, the Rebbe went home that Purim. So that was an unbelievable vision. In the gem tape they have of Tovshin Lamed Gimel 1973, where they started to broadcast the Rebbe's Fabregens live, and Rabbi J.J. Hecht would give a synopsis in English. He would give a synopsis of the Siches. And one of the things that you see there is that the Rebbe is speaking to a very wealthy man from Los Angeles. And he says, "You are a wealthy man, nevertheless, why don't you serve these people?" And he gave him a bottle of whiskey to pour out. So the man was worried about his Rabbi Reichik. So the Rebbe said, "Don't worry, I'll give Rabbi Reichik his own bottle, and you go and serve it." And then you see the singing that went on, and the Rebbe stood up and started to dance, and 770 literally went crazy. Another year that I remember, it wasn't such a happy event. That was Tovshin Lamed Hey in 1975. That time, for many reasons, the relationship between Satmar Hasidim and the Rebbe's Hasidim took a turn for the worse. It really reached its height after the Entebbe and that Pesach Tovshin Lamed Zayin. Pesach, we used to go on a talucha, on a march to Williamsburg. That was the last time that Lubavitcher Hasidim walked, and that's a story on its own. On talucha to Williamsburg, in the time of Entebbe, there became a fierce debate. The Rebbe is saying many miracles took place, and they said that God doesn't do miracles through Poshe Yisrael. The Rebbe called the Israeli soldiers heroes. But in Tovshin Lamed Hey, the tanks, the mitzvah mobiles, which had started basically a year or two before, start for Purim. They went out to all different areas of New York. And one of the things that they used to do, these mitzvah mobiles, was they'd have loudspeakers playing Chabad music. And they went through Williamsburg. And when they were stopped at a red light, they were attacked very viciously. And they were prevented from doing Mivtzoim. And I remember how the Rebbe was just so saddened, and he stuck up for the Chassidim, and he said, it's one thing, but when you prevent my Chassidim from doing God's work, that's when he took exception to it. And those who were there will recall the big tumult that went on. The other times of the Purim with the Rebbe, I recall that there was one year, I think there was a war in Israel going on, and the Rebbe had sent obviously his shluchim with the Purim, Mivtza Purim, especially to army bases, that every soldier in Israel should enjoy Simchas Purim, even in those bases where they wouldn't allow any strangers. The Chabad Hasidim were always welcomed. They would read the Megillah and have beautiful l'chaim, singing and dancing, and the Rebbe ensured that the joy of Purim went throughout. And I remember the Rebbe speaking that there was a certain base which was far away. It was the front in between, and it was very dangerous. They warned the shluchim that they don't think it is safe to go. And nevertheless, the Rebbe said, Shluchei mitzvah einen nizuken. They knew that those who are messengers to do a mitzvah will not be harmed. And they went with the faith that if the Rebbe sent them, they will be safe and everything will be fine. And the Rebbe was actually very, very proud of his shluchim that went. When you look at the next year I want to speak about is Tovshin Mem Aleph, 1981. And that was a very unusual occurrence as well. That year, Purim was also on a Friday like this year. The Rebbe went to Mincha 3:30 upstairs. I think they say there were only about 60 people in the upstairs shul at the time. And it was extremely unusual because the Rebbe told them to close all the doors and all the windows. He doesn't want to interfere with the Shabbos preparations. As you know, normally on Purim we have the meal of Purim as Purim is leaving towards the evening. We wash before Shkia, and it carries on. As I say, the Rebbe would Fabreng on the night of Purim into Shushan Purim from the evening and would go till the next morning. But obviously, when it happens on a Friday, you mustn't interfere with Shabbos. So generally, it is all done in the early afternoon. So the Rebbe said he doesn't want to interfere with the Shabbos afternoon preparations. And he said they brought in some wine with them. He said Alachaim from a paper cup. He didn't even have his kos. And he sat down, and it's never been like that. He started a maimer la Yehudim ha'Yisrael. It wasn't a very long maimer. The regular people who were there and the chazrim were not present at the maimer. Someone managed to hear that there was something going on in the upstairs shul, but all the doors were locked and the windows were locked. But there was one window up there, up high, that wasn't, and he managed to climb up and open that window. And before the Rebbe left, he actually expressed annoyance that a window was opened, and he told the Bochrim to take to say L'chaim, and everybody was there to say L'chaim. And one of the things that they used was the Shalach Monis that the Rebbe had received. They brought out that to the Bochrim, and they said L'chaim. These are just a few of the beautiful Purims that people experienced with the Rebbe. As I began saying, to see the joy on the Rebbe's face was totally unbelievable. To experience the Purim with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe spoke many, many times that there are certain occasions of the year that the Jew has to go out of his boundaries. Somehow, don't take all your luggage with you. Somehow we must learn that on Purim, we should truly celebrate the joy without any boundaries. And he speaks about the fact The Rebbe says, Chayev Adam lepsuma bepurim. A person has to get out of his boundaries on Purim to the extent that he adalo yada, he doesn't know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. And one of the sikhs they bring in that gem is that everybody has to know how to get of their personal boundaries. It's not important what anyone else is. You have to get out of your own personal limitations. And he brought an analogy. He said that when we make Kiddush and Havdalah, the custom is to overfill the glass so that it pours over. And that shows the abundance of and the limitless of God's blessings to each and every one. So he said, but the flowing over is each person according to his own, because someone can have a small kos over which he makes Kiddush and Havdalah, and he pours it over. But if you would compare that to someone using a large kos, a large cup, then even if you poured your small cup into that large cup, together with the overfilling, it wouldn't even fill the cup to the top. Nevertheless, for you that is overflowing, and that is the way you receive God's blessings. And so too, he would he asked everybody to get overflowing. And I'd just like to conclude with a few times that the Rebbe told people in 770 at the Purim Fabregan, he'd like to have 1 or 2 people who will volunteer to reach the level of Adala Yada, to really go completely out of their boundaries with Mashka, and through that be Yotze the whole crowd. There were times, I'm not sure exactly when the Rebbe wanted to show to go out of the boundaries, that he told everyone to turn their hats upside down. And that's the way they should wear it. And many times he told people they had big glasses, even of Sechseneinziger. Sechseneinziger is 96% alcohol. It's basically illegal in America that they should drink these big glasses on Purim. He told sometimes people to mechakula, to somersault there. Let us hope and pray that first of all, I give everyone a bracha. V'shenichnas Adar, the month of Adar, especially now this year, we should be able to go out of our own boundaries and reach a true level of simcha. And if you need to watch some videos of the Rebbe to see the immense joy in 1982, you see how the Rebbe was clapping and singing and making with his arms over and over and over. I think in that video you see Rabbi Sidney Katz, Rabbi Michael Katz's father, clapping together, and the Rebbe going, the simcha is unbelievable. And join us tomorrow, join Rabbi Mesinta tomorrow as we ask for Mashiach, and let us hope that by this Purim we'll be able to have Mashiach and be together with our Rebbe for the joy of Purim. And let us do the mitzvahs of Purim. Number 1, to hear the Megillah at night and the day, to give shalach manos, which is gifts of food, to a man, a woman to a woman, and every child should be encouraged to do it, and we should encourage every Jew to do it, to give matanos lavyonim, plenty of charity. That should be even more than the shalach manos, and then to have a Purim feast, being Friday. It should be done in early afternoon, and may we celebrate La Yehudim Haisa Eira V'Simcha V'Sosan Vikar, may we celebrate with joy and Mashiach. Thank you.
Rabbi Carlebach, the stories of the Rebbe of Purim I never knew half of them. Thank you for doing this. Tomorrow evening at 6 p.m., stop whatever you're doing, put in a little prayer for Mashiach, and please God, we should have the revelation of Mashiach immediately, and this year we should celebrate Purim in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, in Jerusalem, the holy city. Thank you, everyone.
Amen. Thank you.